Everyone. Welcome everyone to today's session as part of the Digital Skills 2-day program looking at digital skills and employability. Today we're looking at social media and specifically looking at LinkedIn. So you're joined by myself today, Kelly MacDonald from Careers and Placements within the University of York, and also James Tingay, who is joining us as a marketing manager for Eurofins, which is an electrical and an electronic manufacturing organisation or company. But James is with us to share an employer perspective on how he uses channels and tools like LinkedIn. So James, do you want to say a quick hello?
Good morning, everybody.
Thank you. So what are we going to cover? By the end of this session, you should feel a lot more confident at using LinkedIn as a channel to promote your profile. And we're going to walk you through how you can develop a greater confidence at using this platform. So we're going to be asking you today to think about the channels that you're currently using, and then thinking about your own digital footprint. And then we're going to introduce that employer perspective and just give you a sense of how employers are using channels like LinkedIn. And like I say, James is going to share his perspective around how he uses it, particularly as a recruitment tool. After that, we're going to move on to just showing you some of the other useful aspects of LinkedIn. So James will touch on developing a profile, and there'll be a huge amount of resources that you'll spot in the slide deck that you've got that will help you to work through developing that profile at your own pace. There's a huge amount out there, and some of the resources that I flagged up are just a really good general start. I'd also encourage you to look on YouTube, because I found that there's so many useful tutorials on there, particularly around developing your own personal LinkedIn profile. But we will flag up the other useful things about LinkedIn, including the fact that it's a fantastic research tool. And then we'll be encouraging you to think about how you start to develop a broader network using LinkedIn. It's a safe space to really start developing that network, and we'll give you a few tips on how you can broaden that network using that channel, and then also how you can start searching for opportunities if you've not found that feature. So let's start with a bit of an introduction to LinkedIn then. So that's what we're going to cover by the end of the session. And here's some fun facts about LinkedIn. So the number of users, worldwide users, seems to grow every time I check stats for LinkedIn. So it's a platform that seems to just get bigger and bigger. So not only have we got 756+ million users on LinkedIn worldwide, but 85,000 of those are actually York alumni, and I'm going to show you how to find those alum and what you can learn from them later on in the session. So we can see in terms of user groups, 15 to 24-year-olds tend to be the smallest group of users, but what we do see is that the growing number of users, the highest number of users, tends to be those recent graduates. So you might find that you might be fairly familiar with LinkedIn as a platform now, but we would expect you to be using this more and more as you transition out of university and start using the tool as graduates. So you can see that from a UK perspective, we have a huge number of users, 27 million in there. So that's 41% of our population that are using this as a networking and a profile building tool. And 45% of recent graduates say that they're not only using it to network, but it's their primary job search platform. And we'll be sharing with you how you can use it as a job search tool. 40% of users say they access it on a daily basis. And of all the social media networks, employers and recruiters are saying that they're using LinkedIn the most, followed by Instagram, which is very much a growing platform that employers are using to really build their brand. Interestingly, 78% of employers are saying they've been negatively influenced towards candidates' inappropriate use of social media. So that's why we're going to get you thinking about what employers can see about you, just as a point of reflection, really, because we want to avoid any negative influence towards what's on there about you right now. So this set of stats comes from a source called JobVeet, and in your set of slides you'll see that you can go in and you can download the full report to look at yourself. So I'm just going to share a very quick introduction to LinkedIn so that we're all up to speed, and this is a great video, no more than a minute and a half, so I will press play now.
If you're a student, chances are you're going to be looking for a job, and you're probably a little bit nervous about where to start, or if there are even any jobs out there. So, if you're done eating out in all the best places all the time and you want to make it in life, good news, you're in the right place. LinkedIn. It's not just for top executives or old people with big moustaches. It's for you, the next generation, young people with moustaches. It's the perfect place to start your professional story. Let's say you want to get a job in London, but you've never been there. It's okay, because you've got LinkedIn on your side. You start creating your profile. You give it love, because you know that's what recruiters are looking for day and night. It's your CV that never sleeps. You get your profile tight. Then you start connecting. Other graduates in London? Yes. Recruiters of top companies in London? Yes. Your mum's crazy friend? I guess. You start imagining whose shoes you want to walk in, and you think, whoa, that's a lot of deep stuff to consider. You shake yourself off and you start searching for jobs, and you see there's actually loads of jobs for students. It's time to get down to business. You start tailoring your profile, applying, connecting, learning. You feel empowered. You should be the boss. Then it hits you. You look up all the CEOs of the companies you like, and you see one of them that went to your university. And guess what? He knows your mum's crazy friend. You start connecting to all the experts and getting the best advice. Suddenly you see a clear path from graduation to incorporation, some adulation, and eventually some serious relaxation. You feel like you can see the future. You keep applying, and before you know it, you start getting responses. First a few, then more, and then an interview. A few clicks and you're face to face with the big guys. When you get the job, that's when the learning really begins. LinkedIn, your career starts here. If you're a student, chances are you're going to be looking for a job.
Okay. So let's move on to thinking about the employer perspective before I introduce you back to James. So when we think about how employers are focusing their time from a recruitment perspective, I think students always find it interesting that the traditional way that a lot of our students will look is by going straight to online job boards, when actually there's a whole chunk of activity that's happening elsewhere in terms of employers using both LinkedIn and general social media to get their brand out there to that sort of new top talent. So if they're trying to get that brand out there, then like I said, something like Instagram is becoming a growing platform that employers are using. So employee referrals are still down there, which is really interesting, that we see that there's a bit of a reduction since the last employee survey back in 2017. But it's still very much a reality that who within certain sectors is still worryingly quite a big deal. So how do we encourage those that don't feel like they've got much of a social capital or a network already? How do we make sure that you can kind of get in front of those employers using some of the other tools that are out there? So LinkedIn, social media, by far the growing platforms. What we have seen is that YouTube, Instagram, that they're up there. It's interesting that other channels seem to have diminished quite considerably. So things like the use of Facebook, yes, employers will still be using platforms like that, but they are saying that since 2017, other platforms might have taken a preference. So my tip for you is if you've got particular employers that you're interested in finding more about, check what platforms they're using and get on those, because they will vary. Again, this is a JobV report that tells you a bit about, towards the top there, how they've maybe adjusted their behaviour and how they're using the top 2 platforms, which are LinkedIn and Instagram. So you can see there a growing use in Instagram, slight reduction for LinkedIn. But you can get a sense of the other social media channels that are still popular. Like I say, take a closer look. It's a really, really interesting report. So let's talk about you, and let's think about some of the platforms that you're using. So when we talk about LinkedIn, we're really thinking more broadly about the digital footprint that you have. You might be on LinkedIn, but chances are you'll be on a range of social media channels. So it is unique to you. It is your online reputation. The way we describe LinkedIn is this is your professional platform compared to maybe Facebook, which might be, you know, the more fun you. That might be how you connect to friends, whereas start to think of LinkedIn as how you can be connecting to employers and maybe talking about some of those more professional interests and joining conversations on platforms that are, I suppose, that you know are appropriate for your sort of professional online presence. So, how do we find you as an employer? Have you ever dared to Google yourself, and what platforms are you using right now? So there's so many out there. And I'd be the first to admit that half of these logos I recognise, the other half less so. So like I say, it will be very, very unique to you. But how are you using them at the minute? Is it largely social? We'd maybe expect that as a student body. But how do we move you along in thinking about how you use these to network, to share things that you're passionate about, that you're interested in, and to research? And that's where LinkedIn is so useful. So there's a really interesting TED talk which I'd encourage you to look at in your own time, and it's about a guy called Juan Enriquez, who talks about your online life as permanent as a tattoo. And it's really interesting that you know, is what he's basically saying is you know, what were you posting 3 or 5 years ago? What's the most recent thing that you've posted? Spend some time having a look at that and thinking about what that looks like at the minute, if you were to think about and reflect on your personal brand. So try Googling yourself and just see if you're happy with that. And think about whether you have started moving on to talk about some of the things that you're passionate about, or whether at the minute it's very much reflecting you know, the nature of how you're using social media. So there's no good or bad, but I would say, you know, as you move into thinking about graduation and moving into the job market, just take a bit more control of that online presence and think about what else you would like to be sharing about yourself. I'm now going to move on to James, who's going to share an employer perspective. So just to remind you, James is his role is a group marketing manager for Eurofins, and yeah, I was absolutely fascinated when talking to James about the different ways that he uses LinkedIn as an employer. So over to you, James.
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, everybody. I've got a couple of comments to make on the video that we've just seen there. It's interesting. I've got my current job because of LinkedIn. Somebody approached me directly through LinkedIn. One thing that Kelly mentioned was Google yourself. Please don't Google me because my face is everywhere. My online digital profile has been around for a long time, and you'll find pictures of me with Bob Geldof on the One Show, and you'll find pictures of me with hearing dogs for deaf people and all sorts of weird and wonderful things. So if you want to laugh, you can Google me. a little bit about Eurofins as a business and what we do with LinkedIn. So Eurofins as a whole is the world's biggest test, inspection and certification company. We have about 56,000 people. I think we turn over about 6 billion euros, something like that. So the company's enormous. As a business, Eurofins doesn't use LinkedIn for recruiting directly. We use a platform called Smart Recruiters. It's a kind of corporate decision, but we all advertise our opportunities, our vacancies through LinkedIn. So what we tend to do as a very, very small part of the bigger Eurofins platform or the bigger Eurofins group is to look at candidates, look at people who are approaching us. We use it for finding people specifically that we're interested in recruiting, because the nature of our business is that there are very, very few people who do what we do in the UK and in Europe and in the world. So finding candidates who are A, qualified, or B, suitable long term is really difficult for us. So we do use LinkedIn for looking for people who are working for other companies, who have graduating from university recently, who've got the sort of profile that we're looking for. So what I wanted to do today was just give you a kind of a background as to how we use LinkedIn when we are looking for candidates to come and join us, but also we're looking at other companies for potentially people that we might want to approach directly. As I said earlier on, I've got this job that I have now because of LinkedIn. I was sitting in my office about 4 years ago, and a little message popped up on my desktop through LinkedIn saying, "Hi, we're looking for a new group marketing manager. Would you fancy a change of role?" And 6 months later, here I am. So just a few key things. I'm going to cover this a little bit later on as well, but key points for us, and I'll go through each of these in detail and give you some examples and some explanations of why they're important. Make it human. I think there is a little bit of a kind of a move to kind of maybe make your profiles very rigid, very strict, very kind of impersonal. It's much better that if you write your profile as a personal profile rather than thinking what someone might want to know about you or might want to understand about you. So photographs we'll talk about in a second. Keep it professional. LinkedIn is very much a professional kind of environment as opposed to Facebook. I am now slightly older than most of you. I graduated in 1992. I don't think LinkedIn existed in 1992. But I very much separate out my LinkedIn profile and my personal Facebook activities and other social media, and I keep them very separate to each other, only for the reason that my LinkedIn profile is my professional profile. My other stuff is my personal thing. So just be careful about what you share. We'll talk about photographs in a second. Write an introduction to you. As an employer, we're looking to understand about you, what you like, what you enjoy doing. Would you be a good fit for us? Would you fit into the culture that we have within the particular business unit that we're looking at? Make it readable, make it real, make it interesting. What I would say is, because you're coming out of university and you don't have 10, 15, 20 years of work experience behind you, what you put on there, sometimes people think with LinkedIn, oh, I don't have anything to say, I don't have anything to write about, I don't have any experience. You do. Anything, everything. List your experience. It might not be a long list, but everything counts, because it gives us as an employer a really good way of understanding your personality, understanding your ideas, the kind of industries you want to work in, and the kind of environment you might be good at in the future. List your accomplishments. List anything that's relevant. I should have put on there, don't list things that aren't relevant as well, because I think sometimes we see this often is the biggest section that people write. They write lots and lots and lots and lots of details. Think about it as to what that employer is going to want to see. That's a really maybe slightly flippant comment to make, but what I would say is list things that are relevant. What makes you different from the other candidates that you're likely to have in the industry that you're going into? list anything that's relevant, anything that gives you an edge, anything that makes you interesting to that employer, that tweaks their interest. Things like the York Award, things like York Strengths, those kind of things to us as an employer, looking at your background, what you've done prior to university, through university, any volunteering, if you do music, anything like that, gives us a good idea of the kind of person that you are and the kind of interest that you have. So make it interesting, make it an interesting read, put something in there that's going to make you stand out. Interesting groups, absolutely key. This is probably the one thing that I would say, if I was going to give one piece of advice, make sure you're following the company that you want to work for. It's always interesting when we go and look at people's LinkedIn profiles as to who they're following and what they're following. Follow similar companies, follow people. Look at the people you're going to work with. Who are they following? What groups are they in? What are they commenting on? But don't overdo it. We had somebody apply for a role last year, and they had more than 500 groups that they were in on LinkedIn. It looks a bit strange. It looks like they've added them in just to make them interesting to us. And I guarantee most of those they'd never looked at. So make sure it's correct. This is all to do with your digital footprint. This is all to do with saying, oh, I volunteered at this local school running an after-school club for 2 years. If your other social profile says otherwise, just be careful. Make sure what you're saying is correct. If it contradicts anything that's on any other of your digital profiles or your platforms that you're on that's publicly available, don't put it in there, because I guarantee somebody will go and look. I think there was a comment on the previous slide from Kelly that 78% of employers have gained a negative impression of a potential candidate through some of their social media. We, as a business, the bit that I work for, the electrical and electronic testing services in the UK, we wouldn't go and look at people's Facebook profiles and Twitter profiles and things like that. It's not something we would do as a business. But LinkedIn, for us, because we use it day in, day out, it's key, and it works really well for us. So let's have a look at a couple of those points in a bit more detail. Can I have the next slide, please, Kelly? Photograph and background. I've just realised that's a picture of me from quite a long time ago. And I've made a comment in one of the slides about your photograph. On the left-hand side, the grey circle with the green dot and the grey background, that's your default LinkedIn profile. That's what you look like. And particularly for me, because I work in marketing, the visual presentation of you is key. The photograph itself, it doesn't really matter what you're doing in that photograph. But what I would suggest you don't do is have yourself standing with a margarita by the side of a bar in Magaluf. It's probably not a particularly good professional impression to give people. And it can cause some complications later on when you arrive at work. But also your background image. So for our staff in the UK, we have a set of background images that we give them that they can use or not use. So for example, you'll see one there, that's my current background. I do change it quite regularly, which just gives a kind of an overview of the kind of things that we do as a business, because I work for Eurofins electrical and electronic product testing. So there's 3 photographs of some electrical and electronic testing going on. I wouldn't expect you to have something of that vein, but please put a picture in. Put a picture of something that you like. Put a picture in of something that's relevant to you, that makes you stand out. If I see a background picture where it's a grey, the bog standard LinkedIn grey image, it's not the best impression. I might skip over it. Eye-catching colours, make it look interesting, and a reasonably recent photograph of whatever you feel is appropriate for you. It has to represent you. That's the key thing, and make you stand out from other potential candidates. Your experience. I did discuss this with somebody a couple of days ago, and they pointed out to me that I've only ever had 2 jobs, which is, at my age, is quite unusual. So I worked for one company for 25 years straight out of university and joined Eurofins in May 2018. as a graduate, you're not going to have an awful lot of job experience on there in terms of your sort of professional life. You may have worked in bars, you might have worked in volunteering activities, but put in your experience of what you've done. Don't make it too over the top, but make it so we can scan down. But what I would say, absolutely key for this, is make sure it matches what's on your CV. I've had so many candidates or so many things where we've seen CVs from people where we've gone back and looked at their experience on the LinkedIn and the two things don't match. And you have to query why, and then you have to have that conversation. Well, you said this and you said this and you said this, and it can be quite an awkward conversation because somebody's forgotten what they put on the CV or they've forgotten what they put on LinkedIn. So again, just make it interesting. Fill it out as much as you can. Just down on the bottom left-hand corner there is one of my colleagues who their experience literally says one line, and that's it. Their profile is the picture at the top and their experience is the picture at the bottom. So we are, as a business, we try and encourage our staff to enhance their LinkedIn profiles, make it professional, put more information in, because our customers look at it. Not only do potential employees look at it, but our customers look at it as well. So we're always encouraging people to do that. So experience. Again, this tends to be more of your work experience that you've done. Anything you've done during university, whether you work part-time, whether you work full-time somewhere, if you've taken a year out, put it in. Put it in and make it stand out. If you can find the logo for the company, if you can make it appear there, it's quite interesting for us to see. Can I have the next slide, please, Kelly? Accomplishments. This is a really interesting one. I just took a snapshot of mine. So if this is always quite difficult, LinkedIn has tended to guide people towards things like publications, because it was built as a professional platform where people would publish research papers and things like that. So the publications one's always a difficult one to fill in if you've not published anything, if you've not gone and written papers, and particularly boring one that I wrote a few years ago to do with, what was that one to do with? Oh, app-based noise measurement tools. But what that allowed me to do is when I'm talking to people about presenting papers at conferences, I can say, well, actually, yes, I did present this paper. I wrote this paper. I did this. The honours and the awards section, I think, particularly with within the sort of sector that we're in at the moment, we're talking about things like York Strengths, the York Award, and any other activities. If you've been through those programs, put it in. It's always interesting to see it in there as well. It's always useful to see within that section anything that you've done. How far back you go is entirely up to you. I wouldn't necessarily be getting a Scouts badge for underwater basket weaving when you were 7, particularly relevant to your professional employment career. But if you've done volunteering, if you've done things like the York Award and York Strength, I keep using those examples, but they are very, very good. As an employer, it shows that you're a much more rounded candidate and that you've been through programs like that during your university career and possibly beforehand. That just rounds out your sort of profile and your presence online that we would then look at. Interests and groups. So this is a really interesting one. I have quite a lot of groups, quite a lot of companies I follow, and this is just a section for it. And there's two parts to this. One is that as a potential employee of Eurofins, if you were going to come and work for us or one of the Eurofins divisions around the world, it's always worth following that company on LinkedIn, because, as I said earlier on, we don't do our recruitment directly through LinkedIn, but we always publish our vacancies, and most of the Eurofins businesses worldwide publish their vacancies on LinkedIn. So if you are following Eurofins York, the business unit that I am employed by, or Eurofins E&E UK, or Eurofins E&E Global, or Eurofins Biopharma, or any of the Eurofins business units around the world, when they post things on there, they post new vacancies, opportunities, you'd get a notification. Also, follow industry groups. Again, the profile, so the little video from LinkedIn itself talked about this. Is go and have a look at the kind of people you're going to be working with. Either follow them, if it's a CEO of a large business or a business unit that you're interested in. But I go and look what groups they're interested in, see what groups they're following, see who they're looking at. You'll find on LinkedIn people like Richard Branson and Steve Jobs was a good example a few years ago, Elon Musk, people like that. They have tens of millions of people following them. And I think people follow them just to show that they're following them. You know, I'm not sure anyone particularly follows Elon Musk on LinkedIn because they're interested in what Elon Musk is doing. They just, sometimes it's a badge to show that you followed somebody. So I would keep the number of people or companies that you follow down to a minimum. Otherwise, we as an employer would have to go all the way through all of those and look at it and go, oh, you follow Schneider Electric, you follow Roden Schwartz, you follow the consumer. Oh, so it becomes complicated for us. And to be honest with you, if it's complicated for us, we're probably not going to spend very much time looking at it. So I'd keep that initially as a very small, tight, compact group that shows you're interested in something. You can see Schneider Electric's got over 2.5 million followers. I would imagine an awful lot of those are their own employees. I know Eurofins, the global Eurofins group, has 55,000 people, employees worldwide, and probably 30,000 of those follow them on LinkedIn. So I think that's probably an indication that employees tend to follow their own businesses for some reason. So keep it to a minimum, keep it to relevant, but go and find the company you're applying to or you're interested in working for. Because if you follow, for example, if you follow me on LinkedIn or you come and view my profile, I get a notification that you've looked at my profile. So if you come in for an interview at Eurofins, E&E, and we sat down and had a conversation, and then I get a notification the next day or that afternoon that you've been back and looked at my profile to work out who I am, or even better, do it before you come to see me for an interview, then actually it tweaks my interest, because I might say to you, oh, I saw you looked at my profile on LinkedIn. What are you interested in? It makes you stand out from other people. Be seen to be interested is a key aspect of that. Again, just below that on the left hand side, there is a little bubble there from again my colleague, whose interests are literally the company he works for. I'm not entirely sure that I was trying to find some bad examples. I found a really good but really bad example, so we'll have to have a conversation about that. But he works for us, so he's following us, but he's got a lot of people don't use LinkedIn in our industry once they've been there a long time. So again, I'll let him off, but I will have a word with him about it later on. Again, because if he interviews somebody, you would go and look what he's interested in. So maybe you can have a conversation with him. If you realize that person, the one thing that stands out on their groups is he's really interested in hang gliding. Maybe that's something to have a conversation about when you go for an interview. And they say, so if you've got any other questions, you can say, oh, well, I see you're interested in hang gliding. How did you get into that? Or it might be an irrelevant question, but it shows you've taken an interest and it shows you're engaged with it. Your about section. This is always an interesting one, I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time on this, because for most people, this is a bit that they really struggle with. This bit needs to be a description of you that is interesting and engaging for employers. Mine's very short. It's just a little simple explanation about what I do, my background, what I'm interested in. Some people have reams and reams and reams of information. But again, I say keep it short, keep it punchy, keep it interesting, and engage an employer with what's in that section. It's not the first thing that we go and look at, I'll be honest with you, and that's why I put it at number 5. We'd look at it, scan it, and go, okay, well, that person can spell, and that person can, has worked out how to use a spell checker and a grammar checker. Great. You'd be surprised how many people don't do that. So it's not number 1, it's number 5 in our list. Can I have the next slide, please, Kelly? And then activity. So this is just a snippet from my activity. Because of what I do for a living and the business I work for, I share, I post, I like, I comment on 30 or 40, maybe even more LinkedIn posts a week. It's the nature of our business and how we use social media. But again, if you're going to have a look at somebody that you're going for an interview with, have a look at what they've liked, have a look at what their activity is, their feed is, see what they've engaged with. Because if someone says to you, oh, do you have any other questions? You could say something like, oh, I see that Eurofins has just acquired a new testing laboratory in Taiwan. That's interesting. It shows that you've engaged. It shows that you're interested. Again, on the left-hand side is an activity post from my colleague, Paul. Paul has done absolutely nothing in the last 90 days. So just different examples of different extremes on the spectrum of activity. I would like to see people engaging with the activity that we present. I don't expect as a candidate for you to comment. I don't expect for you to share and like, because I'd be a kind of, why are you liking that? Why it has no relevance to you. But have a look at, so it can be a conversation piece, it can be an engagement piece. What makes you different? What makes you stand out from the other candidates? So I'll summarize that for you a little bit. And again, this is from my point of view, my experience over the last 25, 26 years of recruiting people, engaging with graduates, engaging with people coming into our business who've got a lot of experience. What do we do? So what's important? Use a recent photograph and have a background image that represents you. You're probably not going to have a business orientated photograph in your background, but keep it professional. Keep it, think about the environment that you're going to be working in. If you're applying to one of the big law firms in London, a picture of you with a margarita standing next to a bar in Magaluf probably isn't the best thing to stick on your LinkedIn profile. You can probably think of something better. Write an introduction to you, make it readable, make it interesting. Keep it short, snappy, and to the point. We get a lot of people applying to us, and to have to read pages and pages and pages of information, it really takes a long time, and you tend to switch off. Punchy, interesting, grammatically correct, key point. List your experience. List what you've done, list what you're interested in. You might not have a lot of things, but everything counts, and it can add up, and it can be of great benefit to you. We might ask you questions about it when you come for an interview. Accomplishments, I would say this is a great one, particularly, again, I mention it again, is that strengths, York Award, volunteering, anything that you do within your university life, list it, put it down. We can ask you questions about it. We can engage with you about it, but also you can engage with us and explain why it's interesting. Interesting groups, yeah, follow the company that you want to work for. Follow similar people and similar companies. Ask questions about what they do. Why are you putting it? Why are you following it? Who are they following? What are they doing with it? Don't overload it. Don't stick 500 in there. Maybe half a dozen, maybe a dozen, 12 is enough for us to scan. But overall, make sure it's correct. If you put something on your LinkedIn profile that contradicts something on your CV, or vice versa, I guarantee as an employer, we will pick up on it and we will ask you a question about it. Make sure the two things line up. If there's gaps in one and you can explain it, fine. But make sure the information doesn't contradict, because I guarantee as an employer, we will pick up on it. So really, that's my sort of 20-minute insight into LinkedIn and what we use it for and how we use it. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them either now or at the end. Thank you, and I hope you found that useful.
Thank you, James. That's amazing. Really appreciate your insight. Ariel, any questions coming up that kind of link to anything that James has shared?
Yep, we've just got a question saying, is it worth adding the week's work experience from sixth form, even if you've worked elsewhere since?
Yes.
So basically, how far back do you go, James?
Absolutely. I'm very much of the belief that yes, there's a period of time. It's a bit like when you get to university, does anybody care about what GCSEs you got? When you get into working life, does anybody care about? Nobody cares what degree I got 20 odd years ago. They care about what my experience over the last 10, 15 years. But because you're much closer to that period of time, I would say yes. I would say anything from secondary school onwards. It shows a rounded candidate. It shows experience. It shows interest. It shows that you've done something. So absolutely, yeah. I would say put it on. There's a point in life when you've been working for a long time that your CV. Does anybody care that I've got an O-level in English? If anyone remembers O-levels, no one remembers O-levels. I've got an O-level in English. Does anyone really care anymore? No, not really. What they're interested in is what I've been doing for the last 10, 15 years in the marketing industry. So because you're much closer to that that period of time when you're at sixth form, put it in. Yeah, absolutely put it in, and include it in your profile on your CV.
And for some, it might be more relevant in terms of it might have positively influenced their sector that they're interested in, or
Absolutely.
so it might be that there's a story to tell around how
Yeah.
that work experience had a really nice impact on the kind of career choices they've made since.
Yeah.
Is there another question, Aria? No?
That's it. I'm going to pause the recording. So if anybody wants to ask a question on mic, please feel free to do that.
Thank you. Right, so we're moving on to the final 5 minutes of the session. It was interesting to hear James, thanks again, James, talk about spelling and grammar errors quite a lot. So when we go back to that stat that I shared at the beginning, around 78% of employers have been negatively influenced by something that they've seen on social media. When we drill down to that stat, 53% of those employers say that spelling and grammar errors were the thing that negatively influenced them. So it's not always about an inappropriate video or saying something controversial necessarily, but it obviously will include that if an employer's picked up something that they don't think is necessarily appropriate. But it was great to hear that James isn't necessarily scouring a future recruit on every platform that they're on. They're actually looking at what they're saying in LinkedIn and cross-checking that with the CV. So it's good to know that, it's not like, all eyes are on you and you need to be tidying up everything, but it is around, getting that digital footprint in order so that you're happy, it's consistent, it's appropriate. One thing I was really keen to flag to you was how you can use LinkedIn as a research tool, and it's something that students are always astounded to see and find really useful. So I wanted to build this into the session, and then a few tips on starting to build that network and searching for opportunities. So I'll try and squeeze that into a few minutes. The alumni tool is fantastic. So I talked to you at the beginning about 85,000 alumni from York on LinkedIn. So they're easy to search for, and I'm going to show you how you can do that in the search bar. But once that 85,000 come into to view when you have the University of York up, you can then do some fabulous things to crunch and slice that data. So you can see where they studied, where they work, where they live. You can see what skills they're using in that job. You can see what employer they're working for. Forgive me, this has now gone up to 85,000 as of this morning. So this is a slightly older screenshot. But so there's all sorts of stuff when you search in the search box for the University of York or any other universities that you might have been to previously. It will come up with the organisation, which for us is the University of York, and then you will see within the alumni widget all sorts of information. So if you then want to search for what York alumni work for a particular organisation, you will be able to find that. And then once you've drilled down, say, for example, if you want to see, right, who's been working in York who also graduated from York, and what employers do they tend to work for. So if you've got an appetite to stay in York after graduation, for example, well, find out what kind of interesting employers those graduates are working for. Or if you want to see, okay, well, who are some of our top employers, you could then go on to EY, for example, and find out who are those 214 that I can connect with and say that I've got something in common. University of York, we've both studied there, but what roles are they now at EY? And it could really open up your eyes to the types of roles that are available within those organisations. And also, once you're onto that graduate's profile, you can have a look at the career journey and the steps that they then took to get to that position. So it might give you an insight into steps that you can then start to be looking into yourself. Because, you know, not everyone will start at that big brand necessarily. So you'll be able to see what that career trajectory and that story looks like. So the alumni tool is absolutely fascinating. And it will also open your eyes into some great profiles as well. So you can start to say, right, well, if they're a fabulous company and it's the kind of company that I want to work for, what kind of groups are they following? What other employers are they following? Could I be connecting with them? So really great tool. So please use it as a research tool, but use it to broaden your network. So as a research tool, some other things to bear in mind. Like I said, you can be looking for an employer and then seeing what that employer is posting. They're often posting reports, live videos, case studies for members of staff, all sorts of stuff that are just building their brand and kind of making their brand look exciting. So anything that's on there, you can then be looking at, you can be liking it, engaging with it. You know, it's great stuff, but equally it might open up some really interesting or influential people, and you can see, well, what are they doing? What are they interested in? And how can that give you some tips on how you can strengthen your profile? So the more you look at other people's profiles, the more you look at what employers are sharing, the more ideas it will give you for your own profile. So civil service is a great example. It's popular with a lot of our students. You can search for them, and it's always astounding to see that for those employers that are using these platforms well, there's a load of activity on there that you can then go and engage with and find out a bit more about that employer. So like I said, top tip, what platforms are those employers using? Get on there and see what they're talking about, because it will give you an insight into the stuff that's getting them excited now. What projects are they working on? What stuff are they producing? Who are they working with? What are they excited by? And it's all stuff that will really help you to understand that employer, but also help you to articulate, if you're making applications, for example, the big question, why? Why do you want to work for that employer? What interests you about that employer? You know, all of your answers are on, well, find out what employers are talking about, what's getting them excited, and reflect that back. What is it that you can connect with from the stuff that they're talking about? Lewis, this is my final couple of slides, a fantastic graduate. He won Male Undergraduate of the Year back in 2016. He did a series of internships, volunteering, all sorts of stuff while he was at York, and he came and worked for us for a short time. And what I loved about Lewis is every week you would see that there'd be an activity of LinkedIn requests. So he was clearly in a quiet moment thinking about, who have I met this week? Who have I had a really interesting chat with? And then he was going onto LinkedIn and he was connecting with those people. And down the bottom here, Lewis then talks in a podcast about how he found that hugely useful then at the point that he was actively looking for graduate jobs, that he would then look back at all of that activity on things like LinkedIn, and then he was able to go to those people for bits of advice, you know, some spot questions using the messaging tool. You know, really found it a fantastic resource to then help him to get to that next step. So I'd really encourage you to listen to what Lewis has to say. It's no more than a minute, but it's really lovely advice. So building your network, it was a good question. How many people do I start to connect with? Start with the people you know. Start with some useful conversations that you've had. Think about people that you met in pockets of work experience. See who's on LinkedIn that you know, and just start to make a few requests. There's an opportunity to send a personalized invitation or just a generic one. I would always put in a couple of lines just to make it a little bit personal. It only takes a couple of seconds, but it makes a difference to the person who's receiving an invitation that you've thought a little bit about why you want to connect with them. So it doesn't have to be a long reflection necessarily, but I think it's nice that you've given it some thought. So I would aim to try and get about 50 connections before you leave York, just so that you've got yourself going, really. So that's the action that I would set you to have a go, and just make a start. And you'd be surprised how many people are on LinkedIn. But like James has shared, not all of them will necessarily have a busy, active profile, but there will be lots and lots of people that you know that are on LinkedIn. Searching for opportunities. So within LinkedIn, you can see within the top banner, the jobs tab. Just start tentatively putting in some keywords in there and see what comes up. So just make a start, and then once you've found a few search tools that you like, you can start to set up job alerts, and you can start to refine that by the types of roles that you're interested in or the types of employers that you're interested in. So simply make a start, and from there you can refine. So if you're getting too many job alerts, you can always go back in and adjust. So if you're starting to feel overwhelmed, go back and refine. And that might be that you limit your location, or you limit the type of job or the types of skills that you're interested in finding out a bit more about in terms of opportunities. Again, make a start and adjust if it feels like your search is too broad. So here is an example of some of the jobs that come up when you can start to search, like you see in the toolbar up here, the type of company or area that you're looking for. And then you can very quickly see towards the top how you've applied, how many you've applied, what kind of jobs you've saved. All of that stuff is then really easy to find again in LinkedIn, because it's designed as a platform for this type of stuff. So it's very, very intuitive. So have a play and see what you think. Some of the resources that we're sharing in the wider student slide deck that you have today will again give you some nice things to read up after the session, so that you can remind yourself about some of the steps to try first. And you know, this is a really nice example of finding jobs and internships on LinkedIn, and there's a few helpful steps to get you started. So there's no shortage, depending on how you want to make a start and what you want to try first in LinkedIn. There's no shortage in some quick and easy steps on some of the resources available. So let's challenge you with some things to get you started. So I would say start with a little bit of a reflection, thinking about your digital footprint. What do you want to tell employers about yourself that's relevant and in that professional context? So have a think about that, and then Google yourself and see if it's reflecting that now, or whether you would like to start building that and adjusting that. What else do you want to be telling an employer about in the next 6 months? So think about where you want to be, and you know, start to think about, okay, well, how do I get that? Is that about generating a bit more work experience? Is that about just saying a bit more about the stuff that interests me? Is that about following a few more things to reflect those interests? So have a go at thinking about, okay, well, next time James looks at my LinkedIn profile, is it telling something that feels a bit more focused and relevant? Connect with 10 people outside of the university, and then connect with as many people as you know as well, so that you're starting to build that confidence in sending invitations, so it doesn't feel so scary when you then send an invitation to the person that means a lot. It will just feel like a kind of a nice, professional, easy, fairly risk-free transaction. So build up your confidence slowly by starting with the people that you know well. Use the resources that are available to you, and don't forget that you can come and book a careers advice appointment in the same way that if you're really stuck on a CV or a job application, you can be using careers and placements to get some feedback on a LinkedIn profile. So once you've made a start, you can take a breath and come in for a bit of feedback. So please use those resources that are available to you. Careers and placements are accessible to you for life. So if you're graduating imminently, please don't panic. This support will be available to you forevermore if you need us. So if you need that feedback in 6 months' time and you're about to graduate, just get familiar with Handshake, which is our tool to access careers and placements. But once you follow the advice link there, it walks you through how to book an appointment with us and how to access that support. So, you know, get yourself in there. Get familiar with it, but keep in touch with us when you leave York as well, and use the support that's available to you. So that brings us a little bit over time, but I hope you've found it useful.